threw them on a big pile, and I wanted to resort them out, I would be able to see which pieces went with which just by the handwriting. You could locate a given document or a given work of a given scribe just by the handwriting style. So that's how they did it, and that's why they became so interested in paleography and handwriting styles, because the way they grouped documents, pieces together was through handwriting. Okay, so suppose you had about 40 some odd biblical books in multiple copies that were here, and every book of the Bible was found here except Esther. There's a reason why Esther probably wasn't found here. Then that means you had approximately about 600 some odd extra biblical manuscripts. Manuscripts that you'd never seen before, and that was where the exciting literature was. So we're talking about a huge catch or hoard of some 600 different manuscripts. The biblical manuscripts are interesting, but they basically verify that the Bible text we have now, coming down through the Septuagint, the Greek text, and the Hebrew text, the Masoretic text, more or less have the Bible the way they had it here with slight differences. But the interesting things are the never-before texts. We call those sectarian texts, or basically non-biblical texts. So we have 600 some odd of those, and that's where the exciting drama of interpreting what the scrolls mean came into play. So this is K4, the granddaddy of them all. And what we're looking for next door is the granddaddy's cousin. Because our theory is this, that if they could hollow out this cave, suppose they had too many manuscripts for this cave. Why didn't they hollow out another cave right next door? Now, our radar ground scans have shown that there are what seem to be hollow areas in the several Mars adjoining this. In 1992, we did ground scans of this whole cliffs, up and down the whole cliffs, and we only found empty areas in one area, right in the Mars next to this one. So we're not pie-eyed optimists, but we hope and we believe that if there are additional storehouses of manuscripts, artificially hollowed out caves, that's where they're going to be, and that's why we're pounding into that wall.
Were the books of the Bible exact copies of the Old Testament?
Most of the books of the Bible that were found here, it isn't were they exact copies, it's whether the Old Testament as we know it are exact copies of these. Most of the books of the Bible agree with what we have in our Bibles. You know, even the Jewish and the Christian and the Protestant Bibles don't agree. Because if you look at your Catholic Bible, you'll see it has a different number of books than the Protestant Bible. It has what we call the Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha. The reason is that the Catholic Bible came down through Greek Latin sources, the Septuagint that had been translated from the Hebrew in Alexandria in the 2nd century BC, and then on through scholars like Jerome into a Latin version in the 4th century AD, and that ultimately became the Vulgate. If you look, that differs from the Protestant Bible, because when the Protestant Bible split away from the Catholic Bible, they said, look, why should we use the Catholic Bible? Let's go back to the horse's mouth itself. Let's go back to the Jews. Presumably they know what the Bible was. So the Jews put the Bible as they knew it together, unfortunately, in 100 AD. That is after the wars against Rome from 66 to 70. By that time, Judaism was in control of what we now refer to as rabbis, the inheritors of Pharisaic Judaism. And they were very dubious about certain books of the Bible, so their collection did not reflect what may have been operating previously as so-called Bible. There was no Bible previously. As you'll see in these caves, there were only scrolls. Each scroll represents a certain book of the Bible. It takes a committee to put it together. So the Protestant went back to the Jewish Masoretic text, a text that was basically developed around 100 AD after the revolts. So they missed a lot of the books that the Catholic Bible had. I'll show you a conundrum of that if you don't mind. The Maccabee books. We're now in the time of the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. But the Jews don't have any books telling them how to celebrate Hanukkah because the rabbis in 100 AD determined in their wisdom that the Hanukkah books were troublemaking books. That the Hanukkah books encouraged the Jews to revolt against Rome and be more obstreperous than was wise for their own good. But the Catholic books have the Hanukkah books, have Maccabees 1 and 2. But the Catholics don't celebrate Hanukkah. So how do you like that for a conundrum? The Catholics have the Maccabean books, but don't observe them. The Jews don't have the Maccabean books, but do observe them. The Protestants followed the Jewish Bible because they thought that the Jewish Bible would be more authentic, and that's where we stand with Bible books. So even the Bible books don't agree with each other as we have them. So we have basically variations from Bible to Bible, which makes the idea of the Word of God is perfect a little bit dubious, since the different texts don't agree anyway, the different collections don't agree. But certainly the ones we have here are the earliest that we know of circulating text of what we would refer to as biblical books. But one should be clear, there was no final Bible yet at the time the scrolls were put in the caves. The law and the prophets did enjoy special reverence. That is, the law of Moses, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy were held in awe. You can see that they spoke of the Torah here of Moses in the collections here. The prophets also had already enjoyed special reverence. But the writings, what the Jews call the writings, the Jews separate their Bible into 3 parts. Law, prophets, writings. The writings would include things like Ruth, Ecclesiastes, Wisdom, a lot of books of that kind. Job had not reached a level of holiness so that the rabbi said to touch them didn't dirty the impurity of your hands. They were just non-holy writings. And a book like, for instance, Daniel, but for the rabbis, this was a very a questionable book, because Daniel is full of apocalyptic revolutionary ideas. So if you look in a Protestant Christian Bible, Catholic Bible, you'll find Daniel put under writings, put under prophets. If you look in a Jewish Bible, you'll find Daniel put only under writings, because the rabbis downplayed Daniel for the same reason they downplayed the Maccabee books, because these were books liable to encourage Jews to embark on foolhardy revolutions, as far as they saw it, against great powers like Rome. Now, last point about that, here in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Daniel is held in very high regard, and he would have been put among the prophets. Quotations from Daniel are widespread in the scroll materials, so there the scrolls show themselves more like early Christianity. I don't know if that's interesting to you. That may be too long-winded.
No,
I'd say one word about Esther.
Sure, please.
And you can always cut if you want. Esther is a special case, and I think a very interesting case. Esther is the basis of the Hebrew festival of Purim. But if you look at Esther, what would be for this group that is responsible for the writings here is a very hard-nosed, very apocalyptic, extremely unforgiving, fairly intolerant, militant group. I don't think they